guys, how you been? Today we're talking about one of the most used lures in bass fishing. In order for you to become a successful fisherman, you must learn how to use this lure. We're talking about crankbaits. But do you need a wiggle or a wobble? What the heck? A wiggle or a wobble? Exactly. Hang around, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about crankbait. The very first thing you need to do if you're going to become a crankbait guy, you need to go out and get a lure retriever, because if you're not getting these things hung up 10 to 15 times a day, you're not fishing them right. These things were made to be fished around cover, in cover, on cover. I'm talking about around cover. These are the workhorse of bass fishing. So a lure retriever is an absolute must-have. Now, very cheap, inexpensive $5 lure retriever on just an old beat up broke rod you got laying around. Pair those two together. I made a video on it here a while back. I'll put that right here for you. Go back and watch that after this video is over. But the quick explanation on it is you get your crankbait hung up, go over to your where you're hung up at, put this on your line, release it down, and it's going to knock off your crankbait and bring it back to you. Just simply a magic must-have tool that's going to put, honestly, at least $1,000 back in your pocket, probably within the first 2 years. So an absolute must-have. Go get a lure retriever. You will thank me tomorrow. Now, let's talk about a lipless crankbait. A lipless crankbait is exactly what it says it is. A crankbait with no lip on it. Probably the most used style of crankbait there is. I would bet you would be hard pressed to find a pro angler that does not fish a lipless crankbait all year round. Honestly, you can fish a lipless crankbait all year. Now, why can you do that? It's just a versatile lure. You can yo-yo the retrieve, you can burn it back to the boat, you can stop and go, you can pause it, you can lay it on the bottom and just work it like a jig if you wanted to. Just so many different ways to use this lure. Now, what makes it so good right now? Now, the water temperature right now is like 43 degrees. Bass fishing is not going to start really getting active until that water temperature hits 50 degrees. Once you realize that, it's going to allow you to make all the decisions that go along with bass fishing so much easier. Stop thinking about what time of year it is, what season it is, what day of the week it is. You need to think about the water temperature. The water temperature dictates every single aspect of bass fishing. The temperature of that water is going to tell you whether that the bass are going to be active or not active. There's no way around it. I don't care what type of pressure system's coming in, or what kind of hurricane or whatever's going on. The water temperature is the #1 thing that's going to tell you whether those bass are going to be chasing bait or they want just some big fat jig laying on the bottom of the river somewhere. Now, with that colder water, 50 degrees, let's say 50 to 55, that's going to be one range. And then we'll do 55 to 65, that'll be another range, which is going to be springtime. And then we'll do 56 to 80 degree water. That'll be the summer stuff. You see how he broke that down right there? 3 different patterns, all based around the water temperature. 50 to 55 degrees. You're going to want a tight wiggle motion that's going to be coming from a lipless crankbait. Now, how do you know it's going to be a tight wiggle? Because the narrow body of that crankbait is going to force it to give a wiggle. This bait cannot have a big aggressive style wobble. So anytime you're shopping for lures, remember that a narrow body lure is going to be a wiggle. A fatter, wider body lure is going to be a wobble. That's the wiggle versus the wobble. Wobble lures do good in warmer type water above 55 degrees. So don't get stuck on looking just for a lure based on the color. You have to understand what the presentation is going to be like on that lure. Where am I going to fish a lipless crankbait? Lipless crankbaits I fish mostly on a open water area. These are not going to be used right now back in these creeks, because the bait fish and the bass are out in the middle of the river right now. Once the water temperature starts to come up, then those fish are going to transition back into these creeks. Then I will go to a different style of lure. Right now, out there on the main river channel, lipless crankbaits is what you're going to be using. What rod? On a lipless crankbait, this is a Strike King Red Eye Shad, 1/2 ounce size. I'm going to use a 7-foot medium heavy. Man, getting swarmed right here. Hang on, we'll let those pass so you can hear me. Hope I don't get bombed. That'd have been bad, wouldn't it? A big old pile right on me. Now this is a Strike King Red Eye Shad, 1/2 ounce size. I'm going to throw that on a 7-foot medium heavy. If I was using a smaller, not as heavy lure, not a 1/2 ounce, if I was going to use a 1/4 ounce weight, I would throw a medium action. A medium heavy is going to allow this lure to flex and load up better and let me cast it better. A medium action rod, it's not going to give me a very good hook set. I'm not going to have enough backbone to really drive these hooks into the bass, and it's just not the right setup for a 1/2 ounce crankbait. Below 1/2 ounce, sure, go to a medium action rod, not medium heavy. I'm going to throw this on 12 to 15 pound monofilament. I'm going to use it on monofilament because I want this lipless crankbait to be coming up in the water column. If I was to throw this on fluorocarbon, I'm going to have a hard time getting it off the bottom because fluorocarbon sinks. So from what you've been hearing, everybody else is going to be throwing fluorocarbon on their crankbaits. But I have found if you use monofilament on a lipless, it makes it easier to stay in that water column. Now your second style of crankbait is going to be a square bill crankbait. Now the square bill is going to be made to deflect off cover. The biggest difference between retrieving a square bill and a lipless is you're going to keep a lipless moving. Once you stop a lipless around a log or rocks and stuff, it's going to get hung up. But any crankbait that has a bill on it, it is going to float up once you stop retrieving. So I want you to train yourself when you're retrieving this lure and you're hitting something. It's going to feel like like a bass is hitting it, but most of the time it's not. Teach yourself to, when you hit something, to stop. This lure is going to hit a log and then it's going to rise up. If a bass is chasing this or hit it, once you stop and it comes up, that bass is going to continue to hit it, and you'll feel that second thud on your into your rod. That's when you set the hooks. If you set the hooks every time you feel a bump with a crankbait, you are going to stay hung up on stuff. So learning how to allow your lure to dig down in the water, hit something, stop, and let it come up, and then retrieve it again, that's going to help you so much because it gives it an erratic style action. This lure is designed for warmer water temperatures, and those bass are going to be more aggressive. I'm going to start throwing this. Once that water temperature gets up to about 55 degrees, the bass and the bait fish are going to start transitioning into these creeks, and that's where I'm going to find my shallow cover. I'm going to throw it on the same rod as I would my lipless, 7-foot, medium heavy. I'm going to dive it down. I'm going to beat it off of everything that it touches. Number one tip, learn how to retrieve it, let it hit something, and don't set the hook. Hit something and stop, let that lure come back up. That bass is not going to be able to handle it hitting something, coming up, going down, hitting something, coming up. That whole entire retrieval is how you work a square bill crankbait. The third style of crankbait you're going to see is just a standard round bill type of crankbait. What this is to do is the larger the bill, that tells you how deep that lure is going to run. Crankbaits are going to be retrieved in the water like this. That line tie comes out, it's going to tip that nose down, and this bill is going to deflect off cover. Treat these just like a square bill. Learn, like I said, learn how to retrieve it and hit something and let it come up to see if you have a fish or not, and then dig it back down, let it come up, let it go back down, let it come back up. That's the same retrieval that I'm going to do on this lure. Again, same type of color patterns. The biggest tip that I can tell you on round bills, if you're having a hard time getting it down to the maximum depth, let's say you're fishing in 10 foot of water, I recommend buy a crankbait that is designed to go deeper than 10 foot. If you get a 15 foot crankbait, it's going to be easier for you to dig that down there to that 10 foot depth. So what speed reel do you use? I like to use a 6/4-to-1 or a 7/1-to-1. I use my 7/1-to-1 all the time on my lipless because I tend to use my lipless in faster presentation, so it allows me to make more casts, cover more water. But once I go to the square bills and the round bills, a 6/4-to-1 allows me to work that lure slower. Once I get it down to that depth, I can slowly reel it across the bottom and let it deflect off the cover. So with all the colors out there, how do you break down what color lure to throw? Well, to be honest with you, what color lure do I throw is the same question that triggered me to make this whole entire channel. I want you guys to understand, don't come out here and make it more complicated than it has to be. Stop overthinking it. I tell you guys this at the end of every video. Fish simple, simply catch fish. This is what I mean. I use two style of patterns on my crankbaits. Guess what they are? A fish pattern and a crawdad pattern. Your fish pattern lure, throw it in open water. Throw it in the schools. Throw it around where you think fish are going to be hiding, trying to escape from bass. Once you get into that rocky cover, break out the crawdad pattern. This is what catches me fish. You don't have to be out here with a $30 paint job on your lures. Keeping it simple allows your brain to relax and think about the presentation of that lure. I'm a firm believer that it is presentation over color. If you present any lure to a bass in a way that he thinks is intriguing, to where he can't resist it, he will eat it. Now, all these crankbaits, you have silent series and you have a rattle. When do you use silent? When do you use a rattle? It's strictly up to you. Sometimes a silent works better. Sometimes they want a loud knocking, hear it from a mile away. I can tell you this, bass in dirty water are not going to chase a moving style lure as much. You can get them to react very close to cover. Bass hang out close to cover in dirtier water. In clear water, I like to use a more silent, natural looking lure. When the water gets a little dirtier, then I break out the loud knocking rattles just in case they can't see it as good. They can pick it up on their lateral line and still give you a very good bite. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button and that little bell notification before you go. That way you are guaranteed not to miss a video. Plenty more to come. Thank you guys for all the continued support. Just hit 500 big subscribers. Couldn't be more surprised. Could not be more excited. Thank you guys very much for that. I will see you on the next one. In the meantime, fish simple, simply catch fish.